we're good to get started.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sound Politics, an online conversation for multimodal anthropologists and artists about the power of sound. This is the second online event of the CoMMPCT Collective. Thank you, everyone, for coming this morning or evening or afternoon, depending on where you're at right now. I'm Nat, and this is Emiko, and we're thrilled to be in conversation today with Nadia Shihab and Trinh. I just wanted to make a brief note that this event is being recorded. If you wish, please feel free to hide your screen. You can also pose anonymous questions in the Q&A. So again, I'm Nat Nesvaderani. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at Université Laval, where I'm working with colleagues to develop a new multimodal anthropology lab. I've been working and organizing in visual and multimodal anthropology for 8 years as a founding member of the Ethnocene Intersectional Feminist Filmmaking Collective, and more recently with our colleagues here at CoMMPCT on the call. Oh, you're muted.
Classic. So many years of Zoom and still. But hi, I'm Emiko Stock. I'm a multimodal anthropologist, filmmaker, and photographer living between Cambodia and Egypt, where I teach at the American University in Cairo. And I engage with digital ethnography, sonic ethnography, and documentary production with an ethnographic feminist twist. I also made some short ethnographic and sometimes slightly ever so experimental videos, and I'm currently working with Nat here on a co-curation of soundscapes. This event is basically organized by the Collective for Multimodal Makers, Publishers, Collaborators, and Teachers, CoMMPCT for short. It's a new initiative of the Society for Visual Anthropology. Our founding members include Nat, whom you just met, Stephanie Sadre-Orafai, myself, and Gabriela Zamorano, who is with us today and who will be moderating with this event with us. We organize 3 annual thematic virtual events and publish accompanying curated resources. So we'll have our website in the chat just so that you can check things out and stay tuned for more. There is also a Google group you can join so that you can be, you can either share resources or be informed on our next events. But previously, our first online event, Print Politics, discussed collaborative work, alternative traditions and practices through print. And this resulted in the Print Politics zine, which, you might have been ever so lucky to get a copy at the last AAA. You can access the zine, though, in digital format and the recording of the conversation and more on the website. So again, check the link in the chat. And we had a soft launch event at the AAA Cascade conference this past November, where we connected with new colleagues about potential future ideas for events and collaborations. And this is a space open and welcoming to all, so please make sure to reach out if you want to crowdsource multimodal ideas, materials, approaches, or just volunteer to organize an event.
And again, that next event is on archives, organized by Gabriela. It's reimagining ethnography through audiovisual archives in June. Today's event, as explores the oral and sonic soundscapes through which we move. We reflect on how sound provides affective knowledge about our situated experiences, even when we're not listening. Today, anthropology tends to overlook the importance of the oral in our worlds and in our works. Today in Sound Politics, we're lucky to be in conversation with 2 independent artists and filmmakers about their experimental sound work.
And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Nguyễn, who is based in Hanoi and who is a filmmaker and artist, traversing boundaries between film, documentary, video art, installation, and performance. Her practice currently explores the potential of sound and listening and the multiple relations between the image, sound, and space, with ongoing interests in history, memory, ecology, representation, and the unknown. In 2009, Nguyễn founded Hanoi Doc Lab, an independent center for documentary film and moving image in Hanoi.
And it's my honor to introduce Nadia Shihab, who is an award-winning filmmaker and artist whose work explores the personal, the relational, and the diasporic. Her first feature-length film, Jadoland, was awarded 5 Festival Jury Awards, including the Independent Spirit Truer Than Fiction Award in 2020, and went on to broadcast for 3 seasons on U.S. public television. I'll also mention that myself and Mia Sarah Lai, a colleague in the CoMMPCT Collective, we did a long-form review of Jadoland for Visual Anthropology Review. It's a gorgeous project. It's a great teaching tool for folks who are working in themes of diaspora and autoethnographic filmmaking. And with that, we'll kick it off with Nadia, your presentation first.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Okay, that should be shared. I hope you all can see it. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to set a timer. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me, Nat and Emiko. I'm zooming in from the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in what is known today as Vancouver. I do feel a little bit nervous, so I just have to say that I don't have practice, a lot of practice giving presentations and talking about my work, but I try to do it because it's important. It helps me also reflect on what I've done and what I'm doing. It's also an honor to be here with Wing Trinh, and I look forward to learning more about their work as well. I also want to say that I have found it difficult to approach this talk in light of what is happening in the world, and specifically in Gaza. There's an incredible amount of unneeded suffering happening. For those that don't know, all 36 hospitals in Gaza are no longer fully functional, and the entire specialist surgery center of Al-Shifa Hospital was just destroyed. So I would just like to take a moment of silence so that we can hold some of this in our thoughts as we move through the rest of this event. In this talk, I'll be speaking about the dimensions that sound has taken in my work. And I approach sound in an expansive way that includes listening, language, translations, echoes, voice, rhythm, dissonance, and silence. The centrality of sound will surface at times and retreat at others. Much of what I share is filmed or recorded within the homes and gardens of my extended family. So when Nat and Emiko approached me to participate in this event, and I heard that the title was Sound Politics, my mind went to a few things: listening, voice, and power. And I'd like to begin with power. So in my early 20s, I was not thinking about art or filmmaking or sound. I was living in Austin, Texas, studying sociology, living in co-ops. But then there was 9/11. And the subsequent war on terror, which sort of propelled me into anti-war organizing, sit-ins, demonstrations. And this began with a lot of anger, but also love. And then there was so much energy and community. But after 2 years, it really brought me to a place of depletion and grief, especially when it became clear that all the efforts that we had done would do nothing to stop the US invasion and destruction of Iraq and the subsequent sanctions that followed. So the mainstream media was a partner in that war, of course, and I thought, well, if negative images of us were used to dehumanize our communities, create fear, and sustain all this violence, then it seemed that our own survival and self-determination depended on making images of our own. So between 2003 and 2018, over a span of 15 years, and it was 15 years because I was doing a lot of things and had other jobs, but between these years, I made a trilogy of films that focused on 3 matriarchs and elders in my family living in the Iraqi diaspora. and their changing relationship to their shared homeland in the aftermath of the war. I filmed with my grandparents in their apartment in Toronto, my great aunt and uncle in their home and garden in North Iraq, and my mom in her art studio in West Texas. So filming in these quiet and intimate spaces allowed me to hear something that was not audible on my own or from a distance, or even in the anti-war organizing work that I was doing, anti-war organizing work. And what I found was that I was finding narrative in the specificity and intimacy of the home through matrilineal networks of kinship rather than stories of the nation state. I also found that I was understanding my own voice in relation to all of this. I began to hear my own voice in relation to the women who came before me and women of this world who have tried to hold things together when all is falling apart. And I also began to see through the lives of women around me that, in the words of Bell Hooks, that, you know, being in the margins is not always a site of deprivation, but can in fact be a site of radical possibility. An image from Shadowland. And I won't speak about these films in detail because I don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to give it as a sort of opening of where I began as an artist. In 2017, I gave birth to my daughter. Soon after, I learned that what calms a baby is not quiet or stasis, but movement, vibration, and white noise, all of which evoke the sonorous envelope of being nestled in the womb. I spent nearly a year in motion, pushing a stroller, driving the car, riding buses, doing whatever I could to create vibration for my child. And there was a lot of lack of sleep, and I wasn't making art at this time, let's say, in the way that I'd been making it before. So I began to carry a sound recorder around with me. I took field recordings wherever I went. I can't say why, other than it brought me some kind of centering at a time when my own sense of self felt fractured. Sometimes exhausted from outings, I would set Uza down in the kitchen, and I would sit at the piano across the room, and I would just play a middle D again, over and over and over again. Recording on this there. I found the repetition of a single note strangely meditative. Uza would often squeal in the background and scoot her way slowly towards me. The song would end whenever she reached me, and I have many, many recordings of these improvisations, and nearly all are punctuated with her voice or her scratching or her rattles in the distance or at my feet. And as the recordings progress, her soundings move from gurgles and squeals to words and phrases. And at first, I had this longing to just be in the studio and be making work again, and I couldn't. And this was sort of the only thing I could do, is just like tap this note again and again. And even like her cries for me, I felt as an interruption at the time. I think anyone that's had a child might know this, but you don't even have to have a child to maybe understand the frustrations of daily life and time. But anyway, now when I listen back to it, I see sort of all these sounds together as a kind of duet, and the two of us entangled and untangling. I was drawing at the time too, and I found that I was drawing these portraits where I kind of couldn't tell if the subject was her or if it was me. This was the piano in our bedroom. This is her yelling. It's my mother too. We were filming around this piano just sort of became the center of the house at some point. So I've been sort of speaking of roots in and out of the work. in and out of my work, sonic routes. And some of these paths have led to lucidity and understanding lucidity and understanding, but there are also processes and journeys that move towards a kind of unknowing and illegibility that confounds, confuses, and dislocates. My brother's name was Kareem. Though we were the kind of siblings that spent most of our childhood fighting, we grew very close later in life, and he was a very joyful person. He was the kind of person that loved life, and you could tell. By the time we were both living in Oakland, we'd grown very close, so much so that we made plans to live together, to raise our families together. He was able to buy a home in West Oakland to fix up, and me and my partner moved in downstairs. So for us, this move, this kind of move towards the communal was a kind of resistance to the scattering that we had seen in our own family through war and migration. It was a way to resist a kind of individualism that we had internalized our whole life. We wanted to question that and resist it. And making this home together was a step towards that. In just a few years, he had taken a barren plot of land in West Oakland and had 8 fruit-bearing fruit trees. Some of them were the same trees that grew in North Iraq, 6 grapevines, a full vegetable garden, and he was just getting started. The time between the diagnosis of his cancer and his passing was only 8 months. He transitioned at the age of 37, and we buried him in the hills over Oakland on the day that the COVID quarantine began. So my brother and I shared a sonic history. There was the sound, first of all, of my mom's garden. These are the cicadas in West Texas. We also shared the same broken Arabic that came with memorizing the Quran, but never actually speaking Arabic at home. We were both musicians and we played music together, often in the music room we shared downstairs. My brother on the drums. So when Kareem was diagnosed, I began to gather the sounds I'd collected over the years. Voices of women in my family, the sound of the rain in Oakland, the sound of our childhood garden. I was interested in bringing together voices and memories and people from disparate places in my own life in a way, into a space that would have been physically impossible otherwise. It was a kind of holding and weaving in a way to recover distance, but also working it into something new, something that was more about a feeling than a logic. I'm having some sound difficulties here. And so alongside the sound, I also began to take images apart, beginning with the photos of the home that we shared. This was the garden that we shared. And this was the living room. And what was strange was that at the same time I was doing this, so I was just taking things apart. And prior to this, all I'd ever done was put things together, create narratives, work with images, and everything at this point was coming apart into these fragments. And at the same time that I was doing this, I went home at some point to visit my mother, and I found a box in her studio, and it was a box of photos that she had taken of her own mother's home 30 years prior that was also made of fragments. And I was struck by this. It was a strange thing to come across at a time when I was also sort of working in a somewhat similar way. And we were both working with the home. And these are some of the images from that. You can kind of see my aunt in the center and me and my brother on the side. This is when we were visiting my grandmother's home. So then from this, I began to play with the material, translation, and the idea of the generational, not just thinking about, generations within my family, but what happens when a moment passes from the original source to a second generation to a third generation when you're scanning it, but also with sound, what happens with that? What happens when it travels and moves onto new materials and new spaces? And I was thinking specifically of what is lost in that process, but also what is gained. Because with each generation or transfer, the material and the form also began to take on new possibilities and new forms. I was thinking of opacity as well, about the body and relations, about longing and absence. And I was letting sound and fragments lead me in and out of image and narrative, rather than sort of like beginning with the primacy of the image, with the image itself. So I was thinking about, what happens when we focus on, well, let me back up. When I began making art, it was really from a place of trying to challenge something that existed in the world and offer an alternate narrative. And there was a burden there of representation, and of having to be legible and clear. And where I was at by this point was thinking about, what can be lost in that process. Edward Glissant is a theorist that talks about the right to opacity, arguing that, those that have been historically oppressed can and should be allowed to be opaque, to not be completely understood. It's a kind of stance of defense, but one of liberatory potential. So with this a liberatory idea, I then returned to filmmaking, like through the sounds, through the fragments, and began to explore how to work with this in a way that I could reassemble and make it feel whole again. And this image that I'm going to end with became the score of an essay, several sound performances, and then a film. And I just wanted to close on this image. I'm out of time, but maybe I'll just end with just one excerpt from the experimental essay. In collage, form is migratory. Rooms come apart, bodies travel. Meaning is found through fragments. I cut a hole in the place we once rested, turn it upside down, peer through. Is loss a window, a mirror? I fear this is a poor translation. I don't think this is about healing, it's about tracing a wound. I return to the piano and hit the middle D again, again, again, again. It is because the piano is imperfect and slightly damaged that the overtones ring like they do. I play it for as long as I can, letting the repetition become a passage. And with that, I'm just going to end with a 1-minute clip from echolocation. Just here.
Use your imagination.
Like it's a very patriarchal song. It's all about horses, men riding horses. شد العزم, شد الحيل, like strong men, go ahead, yeah?
I think it would be better if all of this was said in our language, because when I say it in English, it just doesn't hit home. Mamanın evi işte zikrasıdır. Paravan arkadan tahta, televizyonlar, zuliyeler, ki zuliye yerdedir. Mamanın kanefesi. Oturup mamadı yoksa yanardı çok rahat kanefe üstünde. İşte bir vakitiydi. O zaman bu vakit döner, hiç dönmez daha.
Thank you very much. That's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. That was gorgeous.
Thank you, Nadia. T, do you want to join us now with your presentation?
Yes, I am. I'm here. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Emiko and Nat, for inviting me to today's talk. I've been quite surprised, with the current interest in artist work with sound, especially coming from the more of like a film and moving image backgrounds. But I can see that it seemed to be a growing trend. Maybe people started to feel a little bit tired with visual images. Maybe in some way it's similar to my own experience. After I worked as a filmmaker for, I think, more than 10 years or something, and for a long time, I was actually already started to, I noticed that I seem to start to shift my my focus and my camera, my lens, from the foreground to the background, looking more around, maybe looking more outside of the frame and questioning what is outside, what is around us, what is in the backgrounds in the environment, rather than just focusing on the action or the narrative. And that kind of coincide with my growing interest in ecology and the environment. And I started to be interested in things like peripheral vision, the kind of vision that is not like in focus, in just like directly in front of us, but it's more of, you know, something that happened just kind of outside of the main focus and more at the, you know, in the corner of your eyes. And in that way, I was became more and more interested in sound as a kind of another way for me to kind of get out of the limitations of the representational mode of film and photography and visual images. Okay, maybe I would share my screen now. This just a photo of me trying to work more with sounds. That was a maybe a project that, the first project that I worked just as a sound recorder for my film. It's a film project, but I asked other people to do the film for me, and I just try to focus on the sound. And this quote for me that was printed in some publication that I think that kind of describe my interest in sound. So it's something like, our senses seem to compete with each other, and in the modern era, vision has become hegemonic over all other sensory stimuli. So in my work, I tend to minimize visual stimuli to encourage the audience to activate their other senses, especially hearing. Maybe I would come back to these notes later, because I work with sound insulations, and this is some of the notes that I just put down today to kind of remind myself why sound is interesting for me. A few years ago, I came to the point that I was really tired of the representational mode of image making, and I was trying to do something else. And looking around, researching on sound and different kinds of media arts, possibilities, technology. And I was interested in working with talking about plants and forests. But I'm not interested in describing or representing, you know, the plants of the forest, but I was more interested in learning the communications mechanism of the plant or different kind of natural phenomenon. And I wanted to use or to learn from their communications and use them in my work. So it's more like a gesture of learning and kind of turning the stage, to let nature or other kind of non-human forces, to kind of engage in the work. So now I would talk about these two recent projects that I've done that really kind of took me into a very different direction than my previous filmmaking work, in which I use a lot of sound as kind of a main element, and installation as well. So this one is called And They Die a Natural Death. I made this for Documenta 15. The installation happened in a very old fortress in castle. So I had to work with the space and to make it as almost like a site-specific place for the exhibition, because it has its own very special characteristics. So like I had to build this stage, and I started to be very interested in working with traditional and indigenous instruments. From my previous experience working with indigenous people groups in Vietnam for my previous films. And I was also very inspired by and influenced by their culture of listening and the way they perceive the world by listening. Maybe I play a bit of the video. Your earliest memory, are they sound or image?
Image.
Âm thanh. Thích âm thanh mà.
Sorry, actually, that was my previous film, How to Improve the World, and that one was very important for me because I was really learning from the Jarai people, the indigenous people from central Vietnam, and the way they perceive the world by listening, and that became kind of a big inspiration for me in the next projects. But the one that I'm about to show you is this one actually. This is when I'm working with it in my studio. Anyway, I can't play a long one for you because I think my time it's about to end soon, maybe. But anyway, I would just tell you that in this installation, there are many things involved from the story, the history, the things, the stories that is behind this. It's quite complicated and layered. I work with this writer in Vietnam whose book was banned. His book was an autobiographical book. He wrote about his time in the 60s and 70s when he was in prison, and he will work as a forced labor in the forest. And I was very curious and very really loved the fact that he wrote about his prison time, but he spent a lot of time describing the forest and the ecosystem and all the plants and the animals in the forest. And after he died, I revisited his novel, and I really wanted to work from this point of view. And I was very interested in the overlapping between the political history of Vietnam and the ecological memories. And I was researching to find, how to tell this story. And then I ended up doing this installation that was very simple. Like, I mean, you don't really see much kind of narration, but it's basically, it takes the form of live theater. I use plants, the actually chili plants, because of one particular scene he talked in the novel with prisoners in the forest, and coming to chili forest, and how they became crazy because they missed the chili so much, and then it ended up with a shooting by the security guard, and an indigenous prisoner was killed. And so I wanted to make this installation into a kind of a shadow theater with chili plants, and I would place the audience in the middle of the theater. So you would become a kind of a very small, insignificant element in the whole universe, and you have the thick, dark forest surround you, and you also hear the sound, which would be coming from the flutes that I use. We actually made these flutes. They were not existing, but I researched and I found the kind of flutes that the indigenous people from the north, the region where this the prisoner who died came from. And so we made the flutes with that kind of scale, the musical scale that was from that region. And we built this system that I came back to the prison site, the campsite where the writer spent time in, and now there was a different kind of politics with the forest there, of deforestation and the privatization of forests. And we installed the wind sensor there that would take the real-time data that would be sent over Wi-Fi system to the exhibition space, and through a coding system that would automate the number of flutes, according to the direction and the velocity of the winds in the forest. And these flutes would be played inside the fortress and kind of in the dark. So basically you only hear the sound of the flutes, and you hear the and you see the shadows changing of the plants, and the lights for the shadows, they also change according to the wind data. So the whole thing about this, which is very important for me, that it needs to be live. It worked always as a live performance by nature. So that is actually very risky and very tricky to do over months. But to me, that is the whole point, because I wanted to kind of turn the stage to a natural and invisible force, and invite them to kind of direct or compose the work. And I would I feel like in this way I could collaborate with the nature, and I kind of like step out. I was just like building the framework and providing the instruments, but I would let kind of invisible force or natural forces to compose and to perform the work itself. So this is the meaning of the work for me, and this is very important for me when I continue to work in this way in other work as well. So for me, this work is about listening, about paying attention, and about letting the invisible, non-human forces and the unknown take the center stage. The interconnectedness between human and non-human worlds, between different histories and memories, the political and the ecological. This newer work that it's now it's being shown in Thailand Biennale in Chiang Rai. It's also kind of similar in a way that I kind of connect all these stories and mechanism. But in this one, I work with the Mekong River, and so I use the data coming from the Mekong River. I use two kinds of data coming from the Mekong. So one is the real-time data. So we build the water turbine, and we install it at the Mekong School, which is a local environmentalist group in Chiang Khong, who really inspire me, because they have been fighting for to defend the river for a long time now. The work was really inspired by their work as well. So we travel along the Mekong for research. This is a part that is near the border with Laos, and there's a lot of things that is, especially the dam construction that happened in China and in Laos, that really affects the downstream countries, and it's totally changed the river and really threatened the life of the river itself. the name of the work, I call it soundless, or Raisium. In Thai language, it means soundless, because I talked to the founder of the Mekong School, and he's been keeping the records, and he's been fighting for the river for a long time. And I asked him, what sounds of the river do you remember from your childhood? And he described many sounds for me. But then at the end, he said that, but now the river is dying, so there won't be any sound anymore. So similarly to the other project, yes.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but while you wrap up, we just want to remind the audience that, we are happy to take Q&As in the chat, and right after you're done, we can, have an open conversation.
Yes, so I would just say that in this project, I also use the indigenous instruments and a system to read the river data. And the building itself, where I exhibit the work, was also very, very important in making the work, because it really shaped the work, because the way that I could work with the sound inside that space, and also the history of the space itself. They all became elements of the sound installation. So this is the instrument that I use. It's a Thai xylophone, and I deconstruct it and put all the pieces around the space. This is all historical data from the river that I turn it into music. And so we can come back to this later on in other questions.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much for, giving such a generous presentation of your work, past, present, and future. Thank you so much also, Nadia, for this beautiful, and to both of you for these beautiful works. So we don't currently have any Q&As in our chat. So maybe, Nat and I are just going to get the ball rolling, things started, and with a couple of questions, and then feel free at any time to jump into the conversation, type your Q&A down, and we'll be happy to take them and to, bring them to our guest speakers today. So when I was listening to you both, I was thinking that, what brought us, Nat and I, to your work is that we absolutely love how you work with people that you are close to, and how as viewers/listeners, we feel invited in that closeness that you develop. So I was wondering if you could describe the relationships that you foster through sound with the people, places, and objects that you interact with, and how do those relationships evolve through and impact the different processes of producing, editing, screening, and distributing, maybe?
I can go first. I think that's a good question and a complex one. I think every project is quite different, and at its essence, it's about listening and then deciding what one values in that moment or in the work. And I think it can take one route if you are doing it in a more solitary way with like another person or a land or a history or a memory. And it can take another route if you're working with many stakeholders, for example, or a larger community, or, my film that went to public television, that was a completely different process that ended up shaping the form of the work in ways that I hadn't anticipated. Yeah, I guess that's how I would start. And I also think that, listening, there in my own work, there are relationships to place, to people, to communities, to ideas. And sound work, like any creative work, does reveal our own positionality within that world. Like how we decide, what we even decide to work with, reveals something about what we value and what we feel is important. And I think that can carry through every part of the process, from what we decide to place our attention in to how we decide to work with it, to how we decide to share it and who we want to share it with. And so those are, I guess, some things I think about, and I hope that answers your question in part.
T, do you want to add up to that?
I think you're muted, T.
Sorry. So it's kind of interesting that for my sound work so far, it's a bit not strange, but I couldn't really understand why I made these decisions. That actually I didn't use field recordings in my sound work, but all the sound were made by, for example, like musical instruments. And I kind of like, I thought I would rather build some kind of interpretation system rather than using sound as a way to represent the sound or the environment from somewhere else. And I would rather have something very physical, like a physical objects or instruments to produce a sound in a specific space. And I feel like the space for me, the space where you hear the sound, it's so important in the work. And so I made the decision to produce a sound right on site, and not with any help of any kind of medium like speakers or amplifier or anything. To me, it's the move from moving image to the sound. I guess because of this kind of attraction of sounds, that I feel that it's so physical that when I make it and when I exhibit it, I kind of want to emphasize that possibility. So in any way, so in the work, I think that there were many relationships that happen in the background. Although when you see the work at the end, you hear only the sound and you don't necessarily kind of see all these relationships happening in front of you. But to me, it's in every stages. I feel like I work with the relationships between people, and also I try to have this relationship between human being and non-human. And the inspiration for me came, a lot of time would come from people, like, with the indigenous people. But I think it's this relationship kind of go back and forth. I feel because they, like indigenous people and their instruments, they came from nature itself, but the music they made was how they interpreted nature. And so in my work, it's kind of a thick network of relationship and interpretation, I think.
Thank you so much for both of your responses. We have a question from Benjamin Tausig, a reflection/question. And he is flagging Nadia's work on this one. He writes, care work of various kinds is undoubtedly one of the most sonically attentive engagements that we ever experience. There's so much sonic attentiveness in such work, and yet we have very little in sound studies that deals with those contexts. Maybe the answers are obvious, but I'm thinking about why. So I'm hearing this as a question about why is there little attentiveness to this kind of care work in sound studies?
Thank you for your question, Benjamin. I think it's a really interesting one. And, you know, I have to admit, I don't know too much about sound studies. Even though sound has been part of my work for a long time, I'm still coming to learn that this is a field of study that people are writing about and in very critical ways. And I mean, I can only say that, you know, in my own experience with caregiving, whether it's for a child or for an adult or for a sibling, it can be very all-encompassing. It can really affect the body. It's very personal. And so I don't think it's always an easy thing to step back from and have distance and examine. And then, you know, in addition, the home and caregiving is not something we're, you know, traditionally taught belongs in particular spaces of study. But I do think there's something really interesting and important there because, you know, thinking about the caregiving of a child, we're talking about the formation of language, you know, this vibration, sensitivity, language. And then when we're talking about, you know, the caregiving of maybe a peer or sibling or elder, there's a loss there, the loss of dialogue and the loss of language, and certain things can fill that space or not. And yeah, so I don't know. I have a lot of questions about it. I'm really curious what others in the audience think or feel about this question or other questions, including you, Benjamin.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say very briefly that I thought it was quite tremendous, the presentation, and like, you know, maybe you walked into the sound studies part of it incidentally, but I think for me, as someone who spends a lot of time reading sound studies, part of what was striking, aside from just like the absolute brilliance of your presentation and vulnerability and beauty, was just how absolutely rare this kind of thing is in sound studies proper. And spaces of care work are so sonic and so tender. You know, you live for a long time, like whether you're caring for a child or a sick person, with controlling volume, managing volume, modulating your own volume, thinking about the person in needs around sound and sonic environments. I mean, it really becomes your world. Maybe aside from like musical production, I can't think of any time in the human life when we're that consistently plugged into sonic and auditory worlds. So I think that your talk, among many other things, just kind of exposed a disciplinary gap in sound studies, because I don't think sound studies has taken that up, and I think you did it in a beautiful way.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you just shared too.
T, do you have anything to add to that? I will also make a comment on that subject.
No.
Okay. Yeah, one thing that I will briefly add to this discussion is that, as many of us on the call are aware, anthropologists have been using the camera and the recorder since the advent of these tools. So these modalities are not necessarily new inventions, but some of the conversations that we're having today in the discipline is how those tools are being used, centering, for example, feminist, decolonial, or participatory approaches to how sound is produced. So I think that's some of the beauty in the work that we see from Nadia and T and so many others among our colleagues. You know, historically, there's been a little bit of a gate between art and anthropology. There's been a bit of gatekeeping in the discipline, but we see that gate crack open a little more easily for white men who've had their, you know, sound or had their film work enter the ethnographic canon. in a different way. And meanwhile, scholars of color with degrees in anthropology, when they are doing care work through sound, or when they're, speaking about their personal experiences, often they're told their work is not anthropological. So I'm bringing up these examples because I think it's pertinent to this discussion of how we hold these hard boundaries or containers, and how we're all kind of here to disrupt those at the same time. Okay. Do we have a next question in the chat?
We have two questions, one from Betty Brown and one from Leanne too, but I'm happy to read. So the first question from Bentley is about subtitles, audio descriptions, closed captions. Do you find yourself paying special attention to these visual descriptions of sound, since sounds plays such a crucial role, role in your work? I'm sorry. That's the question from Bentley. And then the question from Leanne too. Thanks a lot for your presentations. I have two questions for artist Tinti. We have heard a lot about the binary between nature and science, within which science is a perpetrator destroying non-human beings. However, you incorporated technology like wind sensory in your most recent project. I just want to ask whether you're trying to challenge that binary and want to invite technology in the conversation between human and non-human beings. So that's the first section of that question. And the second part is about when switching to sound as your medium, do you try to avoid the gaze that visual images often use to exploit other than human world?
I can briefly try to answer Bentley's question. I should say that I'm really honored. There are a lot of very talented artists and writers and thinkers in the room. Bentley, it's nice to see your question. I think, subtitles, audio descriptions, closed captions, in honesty, it's still something I'm learning about and learning how to use in the right way, and learning about the possibilities of it as well. I think accessibility is very important, but there are also ways that we can use these tools to play with form and meaning and understanding. So for example, in echolocation, I played with withholding subtitles as a tool, and as a way to sort of reduce emphasis on information. So I'm still learning about it. I will say I saw a film recently that was really stunning. That was by Shihab Nizal, who lives in the West Bank. The film was called Vibrations from Gaza, and it was filmed with young children who were hard of hearing, and it was all in sign language, and it was subtitled, and the emphasis was sort of on vibration and what could be felt and perceived, even when one could not hear what others could hear. And it was a very powerful work. So I just wanted to sort of share that with the group. And I'm also to other people's answers and thinking about this question that Bentley proposed.
Just on that note, really quickly, I want to point out that Nat and I have been actually part of like a series of roundtables around the question of subtitling and the power and disempowerment in subtitlings in ethnographic films in different conferences. We're still working on the written aspect of those reflections with our other colleagues, so stay tuned for that. That may happen, that may not happen, but those are ideas and thoughts that also I think as anthropologists, we need to be deeply attuned to, because, subtitles indeed and captions and, writing over sound do have their own performative in their own way, and do the kind of work that gives agency to some and takes back agency to others. Do you want to go ahead and answer the questions from Lei, maybe?
Yeah, thank you for your questions. In terms of technology, the way I think about technology is actually normally I'm not a very I'm not a person or artist who use a lot of technology or modern technology. And I think technology is there to help us to express or to kind of in my case, as I mentioned before, I was interested in turning the table around and invite the collaboration with nature and with other invisible forces to come and compose the work. So I think I need technology to help me to do that. The fact that I really wanted to keep this work always live, and it's very, the system actually is quite fragile, and the performance was very unpredictable. I have no idea when it would break down, or if the work would be interesting, or the sound, the performance would be interesting to human beings to listen to. It's not like, it's not within the control of our kind of like human kind of taste. It's not, it's kind of stepping out of your taste. And yeah, so in that way, technology is necessary, to assist this kind of building of mechanism. And also about technology, I also think that I'm also very interested in, traditional and indigenous knowledge as a kind of technology as well. You can say indigenous technology. So my use of the way they make musical instruments, that is a kind of technology as well. And I want to use this technology because I feel like with the musical instruments, there's a kind of embedded knowledge and wisdom. Yeah, so I don't really separate, kind of the modern high tech with we can call it like folk tech or indigenous technology and knowledge. It's just how you can use them is the question. And
yeah, go ahead.
I don't remember the next question.
I love this, the way that you're discussing instruments as a technology to kind of disrupt our ideas of what counts as technology. I was going to segue, excuse me, into another question that we had about sort of practical terms. We have all kinds of people in the audience today, anthropologists, artists, teachers, activists, who are either practicing sound work or who are interested in including sound into their practice. So do you have any advice for using sound in teaching or in public engagement? Are there any kind of tips or concrete ideas that you could recommend for someone who is just starting out in sound work and maybe wants to incorporate it into their practice or their teaching?
I'll answer. I'll give my answer to that. Let's see. I would say feel the feeling of the sound, feel the quality of the sound versus perhaps letting the information have primacy. Also, let constraints guide you. I think constraints are very interesting, very productive, and very generative. And some of the more interesting work I've made has had a lot of constraints applied to it, usually not of my own volition. I think value tension as much as anything else in sound. Don't be afraid to keep it simple and notice where it leads. You know, sound is not static. Nothing is static. So where does that movement take you? Thank you.
For me, I have to admit that actually I'm very interested in using sound, but I haven't done a lot of experiments or trying out with recording many things. And actually, next I really want to do much more field recording and just go into different places, either natural setting or anywhere in the city, and try to get to know the place through listening and through hearing and through recording as well. Because when and you also have to just try our own kind of equipments that you can get hold of. You know, try to get some good equipment, microphone and things, and then record, and then try to listen through playback, because you would notice the many things that you that in the playback of recordings. There would be things that is different from the way you listen in everyday life. So just play around with equipment. It's really exciting. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I haven't done enough recording exercise at all. I'm actually really bad. In one film, I decided that I would forget about the camera. I put the camera away, and now I would only use the sound recorder. But my technique, I'm not very technical. I'm not a sound engineer, and I don't really know much. So I just kind of record, I just try my best. And but I think just the fact that you decide to make recording or listening as a focus, it's very important, and try to do that. And I'm really happy that I made that decision, because the way that I perceive the story, I look at people, and my observation through just listening was very, very different from if I record this story with a camera. So just try. Yeah.
Thank you very much for all those consideration, and I really appreciate, we all appreciate those contribution and this conversation going on, and we're getting more and more comments and questions. So I'm just going to read a few, and they've been posted on the chat, and I just want to make sure that we're covering as much or echoing as much as we can from our participants. So Nassim Zand said when Benjamin was speaking, echoing Benjamin, it reminds me of Tom Rice's ethnographic research on stereoscopic diagnosis listings and the form of attentive listening it requires. Sorry. So that's Nassim's questions or comments. Then Emily Down as well. And in advance, I apologize. I'm really hoping, but I'm not completely butchering any names, but in advance, I would like to apologize if I do so. I very much enjoyed learning from Dylan Robinson and his work around sensory logics and hungry listening. It's thrilling to be a part of this space, and I hope we will be able to listen again to the recording, and these presentations and conversation have been so rich. And just to answer that, and if anyone else was wondering, just to repeat, the recording will be available on our website, the recording of this session, and we'll continue the conversation. Stay tuned for a later announcement at the end of this event. There's also more like a directed question to T from Alberto Eduardo Morales, which is, hello T, can you say more about your process/work on sound installations? You showed us a slide for a few seconds. Can you elaborate a little more? And I'll stop here for now. There is another comment from Ryan Viet, which is about the question that Bentley Brown raised a little bit earlier about subtitles, audio descriptions, closed captions. Ryan Viet commented, "This is such a good question. As a disabled anthropologist who has been in and around audio production for a while, I would be curious if audience is considered in thinking about work that centers sound. For me, caption and other signifiers are something I use now for accessibility, but I wonder about thinking about access friction. Who is imagined as the audience? Are people with auditory processing disorders, deaf or hard of hearing people imagined as the audience? Aesthetics, and what could it mean to think about a feminist sound practice that prioritizes sound but also takes disability seriously?" No answers, just trying to muse alongside. Thank you, Raine, for doing that. And I might add that, you know, this is also a question for me who speaks, you know, multiple languages, not quite perfectly, not quite that well. Indeed, sound carries also its own set of, you know, obscurity in any language, and that's also another problematic, right? So if Nadia or T, you want to, you know, bounce back on any of those comments in particular, or, you know, you want to sort of like formulate some preliminary thoughts on that general conversation, please.
Sorry, I don't remember what slide I show, and because I had so many slides and I just didn't have time, and I would just
so I think that what Alberto may be referring to are those slides from, I believe it was at Documenta, when you had like those different installations in place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Nadia, you also work with installations sometimes. So
also the question was to do with the process of making a sound installation.
Yes.
Yes.
Just in general, how do you conceptualize installations? How do you work with installations? Going off of something that was echoed in both presentations, the body being an instrument, and trying to work with the different senses. How do you then approach your work of installations, particularly since you also did show us that very beautiful installation with the flute sounds, and so maybe thinking a little bit more along those lines. What's your approach to creating installations?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think for installation, it might be different from work to work, but for me, thinking about this one, I think there are many different steps, and sometimes I work on different kind of, let's say, modules, and maybe coming from like different time periods. Maybe I would be interested in developing the idea of working with this particular instrument, for example. So for the work in Chiang Rai, in Thailand, I was already working with my engineer assistant. We try to find a way to build the kind of mechanical things, you know, to how to make this kind of xylophone or a piece of wood, and with the mallets, you know, and how they can play and how they can be automated. And so that could be like one module. And then the other stuff that has to do with the river, you know, and it all kind of influence each other, you know, like when thinking about a river or water, I would be thinking more of this kind of instrument, like kind of more like a percussionist instrument, more than a wind instrument, for example. Like with the previous work, I was trying to work with wind instrument because it's about the getting the wind from the forest, and so I use the flute. And then the other element would be when I know that what venue or what space I can get, and then you have to kind of think of how you can put the maybe the idea of the work that you already have that can fit with the site. So that is the issue that you have to work with when you work with sound insulation, because like for me the site is very important, and I prefer to work with kind of a existing site that has some kind of history or kind of cultural or something, rather than like a white box, because for me, like a white box, it doesn't really have its own history and memory, and also it doesn't have very interesting kind of characteristics for sound. It's quite flat, actually. So I kind of prefer to work with kind of size specificity, and they become an element that is really influencing how you make the insulation. So when I know about the value and learn about it, and I have to try to find a way to design how I would install all these instruments inside the space.
Thank you so much for describing your process. At one point, you said that you haven't done lots of experiments, but I just found your presentation and your installation work just so rich with examples of experimental sound work. So thank you so much for your generous presentation. Nadia has a class right now, so had to slip out to teach. But thank you also very much to Nadia for the presentation, and everyone for your engagement, for your thoughts and reflections. We would like to just briefly mention a call for sounds. Emiko, would you like to throw those ideas out there?
Yes, thank you, Nat. So basically, we want the conversation to keep going on after this first conversation. So we're seeking sonic bits and bytes for our second curated collection of resources for making, publishing, collaborating, and teaching the multimodal. So this is a mini collaboration in crowdsourcing sounds. Submissions open to all. Feel free to share around and distribute widely. And we'll basically, post the link down in the chat. So make sure to copy it before you leave, and, again, to share and use.
And just one last note, thank you so much for the comments about captioning and subtitles and the importance of accessibility. We did have some technical difficulties in planning the Zoom room. We'll do our best to include captions in the recording of this conversation. Thank you, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful Friday. It's been great talking with you today, and hopefully we'll see you in the call to sounds.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening or day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.